to participate in the licentious rites, and even sought to join him in the sacrificial flames, which is a remarkable thing, the situation is clearly indicated in the Joseph Smith Book of Abraham, where 3 virgins at one time were sacrificed, the daughters of Onita, one of the royal descent. These virgins were offered because of their virtue. They would not bow down. In short, they refused to participate in the fertility rites, and so they were killed upon this altar, and it was done after the manner of the Egyptians. This is what Abraham says in Abraham 1:11. One can appreciate the wisdom of the rabbinic distinction between Pharaoh and Nimrod, without which the wires would be hopelessly crossed between a Moses and an Abraham. And notice, all of the patriarchs and the prophets, they are going through the identical same routines with the same identical antagonist, Pharaoh. In the original versions, it was Pharaoh in both cases. The Nimrod who calls his magicians and wise men to counter the claims of Abraham, and he loses the contest, and he ends up bestowing high honors on his guest, this same Nimrod turns up as Pharaoh in the Genesis Apocryphon, the oldest known version of the story, in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Parallels, ties, connections, remarkable coincidences, rivalries, kingship, priesthood. We have it all in our Book of Abraham. Now, it has taken scholars 100 years to put all of this vast material together, and more still come out. Like I said, I'm involved right now with this Dead Sea Scrolls exhibit, Ink and Blood, here in my hometown. And in the Genesis Apocryphon, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, we find further parallels and information since 1947. It's not refuting the story of Abraham. The further archaeologically discovered texts, such as these magnificent Dead Sea Scrolls, are only serving to confirm the stories, add little extra new details to the overall story. But the overall story now is that Abraham went to Egypt. He had his wife violently taken away from him. He himself was the rival of Pharaoh, and he was going to be sacrificed through the fertility rites, or the said festival rites of the Egyptians, and the angel of the Lord came and saved him. Now, interestingly, the angel of the Lord also came and saved Sarah. What the angel did is he smote Pharaoh, so that Sarah was not having sexual relations with Pharaoh. Now, interestingly, I believe it's one of the Dead Sea Scrolls, it says that Sarah was with Pharaoh for 2 years. This wasn't just an overnight jaunt. Can you imagine the anguish and the anxiety both of Sarah and Pharaoh for 2 solid years? It's a remarkable thing. We get none of this in the biblical account, and yet all of it is coming out further and further. And the true priesthood possessor is always saved by the angel. Of course, see, the angel priesthood is much stronger than man's kingship priesthood that Nimrod had. Well, and then the story says, well, Nimrod recognized that. He was beaten twice. He was beaten once because he couldn't enjoy Sarah. He couldn't forcibly take a man's wife from him. And he was beaten again is that he couldn't get rid of the guy in the first place. He couldn't get rid of Abraham. Abraham had the priesthood. Well, he can't let that kind of man stay in the country. Of course not. So he honors him and kicks him out. This is the story. This is the extra canonical materials coming out now that fill in all of the lost gaps in our Bible. They are consistent. They are identifying the same antagonists and enemies of the prophets of God and the patriarchs, and the same stock situations happen to them with the same conclusions. It is indeed remarkable to have these kinds of materials to help us appreciate the genius and power of our scriptures. Unlike Nibley said on page 66, the remarkable thing is, according to the book of Abraham now, you see, the Egyptian Pharaoh was ruling his people wisely and justly, although he was faking it with his claims to the priesthood. But he went ahead and acted like he really did have it anyway. He did have the kingship, but he was seeking earnestly to imitate that order established by the fathers in the first generation. And this is exactly what the pharaohs did, and Nibley shows this time and again. Kings and high priests did not hesitate to manipulate divine oracles and forged documents because they were always trying, they were unsure of their authority for one thing, and they were always trying to show that they had the loyalty of the people because they had the legitimate kingship and the priesthood. Well, when the real priesthood shows up, of course, there's going to be a clash, and there was. And Nibley identifies it. He goes through page 66, 67, 68, and then the strange setting that I've been elaborating on, basically the idea of the parallel, the interfusion of Asiatic practices with Egyptian back in those days, very plausible at this point. And Pharaoh and Canaan visiting celebrities. There was 2 areas in Canaan and Egypt where the legends meet and fuse, and Nibley discusses that also. And then he discusses various different aspects of that. And brings in the Senuhi story again. Once again, what Nibley is trying to do is establish that not only does the Egyptian literature show these ideas with the doomed prince and the story of the 2 brothers and the story of Senuhi, they are identifying the ritualistic aspects of these various rites and the problems of the leaders of the nations clashing and so on and so forth. And right on the border, he says this on page 76. I will be able to sum up this chapter. Oh, good. I'm skipping heavily. I'll let you read the details. But on page 76, there are undeniable ties with the old Egyptian story of the 2 brothers, and the tower motif is among them. And right on the border, between Egypt and Canaan, was discovered the so-called Al-Arish shrine. This is a single cut block of granite, and it's covered with inscriptions telling an epic tale. Here it suffices to recall that the happy ending of the story calls for a great celebration in Memphis, and Pharaoh invites or summons all of the Asiatics to be present before his throne of the universe, where stand the 4 idols of Pharaoh. So again, we find the 4 idolatrous gods of Pharaoh, identified in our facsimile number 1, you see, meeting together with Canaanites and Egyptians in a great common year rite. So from all of this, it would appear that the situation depicted and explained in the book of Abraham with the idolatrous gods of a country, the Ur of the Chaldees, you see, this can be fully justified because they were participating in yearly sacrificial rites, and these yearly rites involve both Egypt and Canaan. This isn't the wild fantasy and imagination of Joseph Smith. This was the correct routine situation, and that is the remarkable thing. So I did. I got to chapter 4, starting on page 77. I'll begin that in my next podcast. So thank you once again for joining me in these Backyard Professor podcast series. I hope you're enjoying them. I'm enjoying producing them for you. Until next time, remember, have a great life.